Hello and welcome back to Journey with Rebecca. My name is Rebecca and today I am dehydrating and re-rooting some basil. So for those of you who don't know, I work on a farm and that means I get to come home with a lot of stuff. Stuff that would be destined for compost because it either didn't sell, it's overgrown, or it's just not good enough for our customers. So I'm very abundant these days, and today I'm very abundant with basil. Let me just show you these ginormous plants behind me or next to me. So unfortunately, these basil plants were way overgrown, big, stemmy, went to flower, and just weren't suitable to sell to our customers and were destined for the compost, and that's where I come in. I compost dive a lot these days, and I'm so lucky to have all of this beautiful basil that I'm going to process, and in the process reroot some of it so I can kind of have a more manageable plant and keep it in my kitchen just for the winter months. I know it's still midsummer, but I'm thinking future wise it would be nice to have a basil plant indoors. So I thought about maybe being able to just fix some of this, but I think it's just too big and too stemmy, and I think it's just too far gone. So I am going to take some cuttings and root them in water, and then I'm going to dehydrate the rest so I can have it in my kitchen for cooking for a long time to come, I think, because this is a lot of basil, and I know once you dehydrate something it shrinks down so much, but I have these two huge plants and I think I'm going to end up with a ton of basil. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to start with is just taking some actual cuttings from one of these plants and just placing it in water so I can root new basil plants. It's really simple and easy to do, and within 3 to 5 days probably I will begin to see some roots, which I can then keep on my windowsill for a little bit until it's ready to actually transplant and plant. One thing you want to do is keep it out of direct sunlight, which I do have some beautiful shelves in my kitchen and skylights, which I think it's going to be a little bit too much sun. So I'm just going to have to be careful. You don't want to put it in direct sunlight because it's going to be too much for the plant and it won't survive. But what you want to do is just find some growth that has a good amount of stems so you can actually place it into the water. So I found a couple of good ones here. If they have started to seed at all, you're going to want to take those off. This hasn't quite gone to seed yet, but like see something like this has started to seed. You want all of the energy once you cut this to go into growing the roots, not growing the flowers when it goes to seed. So if you do take any cuttings, just make sure that you cut the seed part off. Now that I have all these fresh cuttings, I'm just going to place them into water. You want to make sure that you change the water every couple of days just so it's not getting dirty and your stems are not rotting. But this is just going to sit either on my windowsill or on my counter now, and within a week I should have roots growing from the stems. Now that I've saved some of the clippings so I can reroot them and I have more basil, next you want to actually remove the basil leaves from the plant, which will be a long process because there is so much basil. One thing you do want to be mindful of when you're drying your basil is to make sure that you've gotten the stem part off. So you want to take it off right where the leaf begins and leave this stem part off. This is going to cause your basil to take longer to dry and could dry unevenly, and you don't want to introduce any moisture into your dried basil. Also, take off any parts that have flowered. You don't want to dehydrate this either. It's going to dehydrate unevenly. All you want are these big beautiful leaves. If you have any leaves that have wilted completely or looks like they might have some bug damage or have begun to brown, you are not going to want to use those. You're going to want to leave those out and save those for your compost pile. I have removed all of the good leaves from this one basil plant. As you can see, I still haven't done the other one yet because I want to make sure that I have enough room in my dehydrator before I take off all the leaves. I want them to remain as fresh as possible before I put them into the dehydrator. I'm just giving the basil a quick rinse to knock off any dust, dirt, debris, insects that may still be roaming around on there. Once they're rinsed, I'm just placing them onto a towel, not in a complete single layer, just enough so that they're not all clumped together. And then just placing another towel on top and gently patting down on it just to get the water off. They don't need to be completely 100% dry because they are going to go in the dehydrator. I just don't want them to be sopping wet. Now the basil is ready to go on the trays to go into the dehydrator. I pack them as full as I possibly can while still trying to keep them into a single layer. I don't want to layer any on top of one another because they won't dry evenly. And I also want to make sure that all of the leaves are spread out and not folded over one another. Then they will go in the dehydrator on the lowest setting, which is 95 degrees, for several hours. Okay, it's the next day. It took a really long time for this basil to dry, longer than I expected, and I know I dried some last season, but I can't remember how long it took. I did 2 batches. One of them went all night, overnight last night, and the first batch probably took close to 10 hours, which I just wasn't expecting. But basil's filled with a ton of oil, so it takes a long time, and you want to make sure that it's done properly. So this is what I'm left with. It never ceases to amaze me, like I've said, how much when you're dehydrating something, it shrinks down. It's just like you start with a full tray that you can't possibly cram any more into, and then suddenly it's done, and you're like, where did it all go? But here it is. So you can hear how nice and dry and crunchy it is. So now it's really up to you with what you're going to do with this and how you're going to store it. I have my pestle here that I have started to grind up some of the parsley with, and parsley, this is definitely basil. What I have found is that there are, even despite how long it's been, there are some pieces that just aren't quite dry enough. So they're not really breaking up as well as I would like them to. So I am actually going to just remove this part completely because I don't want to introduce any moisture into this. So you can grind this up. If you have a pestle, you can do that. If not, you can literally just take it and do this. It's really up to you if you want to leave them full, you could do that as well. It's really up to you. I found these really cute jars yesterday at the thrift store. I'm a sucker for little cute jars, and I'm constantly using them all up and then wondering what I'm gonna store all of my stuff in. So I'm just going to continue grinding these up, taking out any pieces that maybe aren't completely totally dry, and just, I mean, you could use this for dinner tonight if you wanted to. I just don't want to introduce any moisture because it will ruin all of my hard work. I have some oregano that I dried last season, and I have parsley, some that I've dried last season, some out in my garden that I'm going to dry again, and I'm thinking of making like an Italian blend to use in soups and just all around recipes going forward this year. So this is what I'm left with after I have ground down all of the basil. Isn't it crazy to think that those 2 huge basil plants I had are dried and turned into this? It doesn't seem like much, but this honestly will probably last me quite a while. It's rewarding to grow your own herbs and dry them and then use them in your kitchen. Now, technically, no, I did not grow this basil, but I did save it from its destination of the compost, which also feels really good. So you may feel like, why is it worth all of the effort? For me personally, it's just like I said, it's rewarding. It feels good to make things with your own hands and do things by yourself. So I love doing stuff like this, and yes, it may seem like a small amount, but a minimal amount of effort really. The dehydrator did most of the work for me, and what I'm left with is this beautiful, fresh, lovely smelling basil that I can use for recipes that for when I cook for my family. So totally rewarding and worth the effort. If you haven't done so already, you should really try drying your own herbs. So I really appreciate you hanging out with me and drying some basil, and I hope you give it a try yourself. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and like this video, and I will see you guys soon.